So now that we've kind of wrapped up this project, I want to talk about how to use this as a base mesh, where to go from here. So what we would essentially do is we just utilize things like layers to warp this into whatever we want this to be. So let's go ahead and play around with this just so I can show you what I mean. I'd come in here on my highest subdivision level, just go ahead and create a layer here, hit plus, and we could start to adjust this. So let's say I wanted to turn this into kind of a fantasy character like a goblin. I could lower my subdivision levels down here, and then just using the tools we've learned in ZBrush, we can make this adjustment. So one of the things I'm going to do for a goblin is just make it have shorter legs that are a bit stumpier. I'm going to mask it at the knee there, come down to the feet with my move tool, and I'm just going to move these up. So that way we get a little bit smaller leg. And then I'm going to come into the feet here, maybe mask those, soften this, and then move this up to just get a staggered looking body in general. I could do the same with the torso, maybe come to the midsection here and just kind of move this up and maybe a little bit lower on the hips there than where I had for that. Just soften that. Make sure we're not accidentally moving the arms. Move this up to just have more of a stout body. And mid-leg here, I'll do the same thing. And just kind of keep adjusting these proportions till I get something that looks a little bit more like the torso I'm looking for maybe a goblin. So now we're going to have this short, stout, sort of buff-looking character. Coming into the arms, I can make some adjustments here. We can go ahead and come into the hands and make these up higher. So I'm going to use a mask lasso. Just select these, soft select these quite aggressively. Use my move tool here to just hit the home button here, rotate this to align with the hand directionality, and move these up. Then with the hands themselves, I'm going to try and make these a bit bigger just to kind of fit the fantasy look. Usually fantasy characters have pretty large hands, so just kind of coming to the base here, we can move this down, scale this up. And we might want to approach this differently in how we scale. I might scale more from the middle. Maybe not. I could also use something like the inflate brush here, which might be a good option. The scale here might not be what I'm looking for. So if I do that, I might have to move these. But something like that will give us larger hands. I don't think that's what I want, though. I think I want thicker hands. If you use BM, you can find something called magnify. Magnify is a bit like inflate, but it does more so out than anything. So you can see I can magnify the fingers here. And I might need a mask on a finger by finger basis, which is not uncommon, but you can see how we got the thumb nice and big there. I could come to this finger here, magnify this. Okay, maybe we'll switch to the inflate. BIN to get to inflate. We could inflate this. We could deselect that, mask this area, inflate that one, and then deselect that and come to the next area here. And mask that one. Oops. Probably want to mask the pinky separately. So I'll just get that in there. And then you can invert that, get the pinky. And as I go up in detail, you can see it's going to retain that primary form, but we're going to have all our details. So we get a nice detailed hand there. I'm going to make the palm shorter. For some reason, I just feel like this palm feels a bit long for something like a goblin. So we can come in here, just move that back up a bit. So we get sort of these squattier hands. And when I was talking about the hands, I was talking about that idea of making them elegant and art-like versus something rough and rugged that might be holding a weapon. We can then come up and adjust other forms. One of the big areas for something like a goblin is going to be the face. So I'm just going to hit the X button to turn on symmetry if it's not already on. Come in here to BMV, to the move brush, and start adjusting this to have more of a goblin shape. I might want to keep the eyes turned on so I can make sure those aren't getting distorted. And that's an area, if I want to keep that kind of in place, I can mask. But as far as more of a goblin-like face goes, they tend to have these larger jaws. So I'm going to bring the jaw forward, and I'll actually bring the mouth backwards more. So that way we get a larger area that we could potentially put teeth into, make it more monster-like. And I might actually give it a bit of an underbite. They have large noses, so I'm going to come into the nose here and make this a lot more dramatic. I can mask this, so we just kind of get the tip and kind of get this placed in here and start working this. I'm kind of doing a Dungeons & Dragons or Magic the Gathering sort of rendition here of a goblin, if you're wondering. That is where this inspiration's coming from. So something like that's going to start to give us something looking fairly goblin-like. I'm not going to worry about like a mouth shape yet or lips. We're going to get the jaw coming down a bit more, and I might want to get a pointier chin going here. As far as the jaw going back, we could play around with that. I'm noticing on this image I'm looking at that the jaw kind of tucks in a bit more to kind of emphasize some of these areas, get narrower features to the head here. We can then come in and play with the ears. So the ears are generally pointed on goblins. I can go ahead and mask those and pull these up and back. Might need to mask those a little bit better if I'm going that large with brush. But get these nice pointy ears that goblins tend to have. We can only push this topology so far, so we don't want to push our luck here. But we could take some time shaping what we got and hopefully getting an okay result. I could also do a bit more work on the ears at a higher topology level. I like to stay as low as long as possible whenever I'm doing this sort of thing, though. And here I'm just kind of giving the lobes a little bit more character. I might want to sculpt those in at the end of the day. For the head shape, we have a bit more going on with the brow, but I think that's going to be something we sculpt in. We could also exaggerate some of the muscles if we want, or de-exaggerate them. So for example, if I wanted to make this character a bit scrawnier, I could pull down these muscles here, so we get a little bit less of a buff goblin. I still like the idea of a buff goblin, though, so I'm probably going to keep that. But let's go ahead and come into something like the head here and just kind of pull this down so the neck's not quite as long looking. It matches the squatty body that our character has. All right, let me change the rotations and just kind of pull this down. Now, if you're going to do this with the eyeball, a trick is to click this icon here. That will do all the subtools in the scene, so that way we can pull that down with the eyes and make sure that those are also moving down. I could also do this with like the scale of the head. So if I wanted the head to be bigger, I could do that as well in proportion to the body. The goblin I'm looking at has a fairly large head, so I might go ahead and do that and just kind of pull this down and continue kind of finessing some of these areas. So now that that's there and I see it, I'm actually going to pull back up our buffness here and just kind of get these to read better. And there we go. We have a start to a goblin, and it's quite a bit different than our human. We can then come and start sculpting some of the more fine details here, things like the mouth, getting those to be more in the shape we would like. I kind of feel like moving the mouth corners forward a bit more here would be beneficial, and just spending some time shaping this. But you can see how quickly we can start to get something that looks different, looks very different than what we had. And we can easily come in here and start adding in other sculpt detail. So things I'm noticing with this character is he has a much more exaggerated brow ridge. So I could start working in a bit stronger of a brow, kind of just already forming and following the anatomy we have. There's stronger cheekbones on the reference I'm looking at. Snarl line is a bit more aggressive. So just coming in here. We have this area that's butting up against here, a bit stronger. We've got some lines kind of running along the head. Just get in here with some very quick forms there. Jaw-wise, there's something here I'm just not liking too much. I don't know what it is exactly. Maybe it's the angle of the jaw, the narrowness or pointiness of the chin. Maybe this is too much of a witch head and not enough of a goblin head from this point down. So maybe what I actually need is a broader chin that's fits the jaw. And I think that's actually going to be more in line with what I'm going for. But yeah, working with some reference here would be a good idea. I'm just kind of eyeballing it based on general goblin knowledge. But yeah, hopefully it gives you an idea of the versatility of this, that you don't just have to stay human at the end of the day. We can come in here, we can switch this to all sorts of different fantasy creatures. We can, morph things like the lip here. Goblins sometimes have larger lips, so maybe I want to exaggerate that lip there. Maybe that's part of what's not looking goblin enough. Same with this here. I might even come in with something like the move, and I could use things like masking here to mask this. And maybe not. Maybe my best bet is to just kind of sculpt this in here. I'm having a hard time with that one. Okay. So this is one of those ones where I'm going to have to use my brain power, and I don't think I have much left today. So kind of move those up and then see if I can't sculpt these down. Yeah, it's not going to work for me. All right. Something like that for now. But we can play around with it, and hopefully you get the idea. Kind of come in here and turn this from human to whatever we want this to be. In this case, goblin here. And the cool thing is, if we do this with something like layers, and I come in here and come to this layer, we turn this off, you can see that I can toggle between goblin and human. The only issue is the eyeballs there. Didn't come with it. Those would need to be on their own layer toggle. I'll turn them off for now, so it's not throwing us off. But you can see here the difference as I turn that on and off is pretty massive. And the cool thing is I can actually warp between these. So you can see using this dial, I could create a different range of things. For example, if I find maybe halfway is a better look for my goblin, there you go. Now I have a nice goblin race. Maybe I went a little bit too much on the low end, and something right in the middle here is ideal. That could be a possibility. And if I wanted to branch off from here, maybe there were some details I liked with this being a goblin, maybe the larger hands, I could go in and kind of change those. But that is the idea. So now I have this document that morphs between humans, goblins, and apparently half goblins, because why not? And yeah, it's all good stuff. All right. So that is sort of the process there of working with a base mesh. You use it as a launch point, you edit it, and then from here we could add in whatever details. We could bulk the muscles, we could reduce the muscles, we could smooth out the muscles, and turn this into whatever we want. All right. So as sort of a final challenge here, what I'd like you to do is just try morphing your character into something else. Try some sort of a fantasy creature, maybe a goblin, an orc, an elf. You could even go more exotic and turn it into like a lizard man or a snake person. You could even try switching the gender. That would be a good exercise to learn the differences between genders and just how challenging it is to do that. But yeah, give it a shot. Go ahead and just try and turn your character into something other than a human and see what results you get. When you do so, make sure you use a layer though, because you could make as many layers as you want in here and turn this into as many characters as you want. All right, so go ahead and give that a shot and see what you can create.